Nearing the mid-80s, with several bona fide hits under his belt and with all the money and influence in the world, I'm willing to bet that Spielberg felt free to do whatever the hell he feels like. At the same time, Spielberg was in a dark but emotional place for lots of reasons. So when Lucas came to him with a script for an Indiana Jones sequel involving black magic, child slavery, and a murderous cult, he said, "Sure." And the result was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. The critical reaction to this film was, and still is, fascinating. While yet another commercial success, the film was derided by critics and audiences for its dark tone, overt violence, and racist undertones. It was seen as yet another example of how sequels are never as good as the first one, and this one's Indian set dressing and violent darkness was only compounded when The Last Crusade was released and went back to the sunburnt desert and cartoonish Nazis reminiscent of the first film. For the longest time, Temple of Doom was the black sheep of the franchise. That is, until two things happened. One, the kids who grew up watching all Indiana Jones films, like myself, loved it, not giving a care to the horrifying content in the film and enjoying it all the same. And two, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was released. That's it. That's the video. No, not really. We'll get to Crystal Skull way later down the line. But no doubt that that film led to more love for this film. And nowadays, most people agree that it stands more or less alongside its brethren. Well, everyone except Spielberg. To this very day, he doesn't speak highly of this movie, even once saying, "I wasn't happy with Temple of Doom at all. Not a single ounce of my own personal feeling is in that film." He says the only good thing to come out of the movie was he met his future wife, Kate Capshaw. But to be honest, while the film isn't perfect, I wish he took a look back at it, as I think Temple of Doom is about as good as any of the other Indiana Jones films. The film moves back in time to before the events of Raiders to show Indy in a different point in his life. This time, after a pretty fun prologue in Shanghai, Indy's adventures take him to India, accompanied by the spunky, short-round, and irritating but knockout Willie Scott. This time, they're looking for a bunch of stones or something, but they're also the backdrop to the central mystery of the film, which is, where are the kids of this village being taken, who's taking them, and why? Well, it's not a big a mystery, as it turns out to be a murderous cult which does this as its pastime. What results is a battle against darkness as India is tested like never before. Alright, elephant in the room, let's discuss the depiction of India and the violence. On how India is represented, it's bad. It's not Birth of a Nation, but what we get is a watered-down, highly cartoonish view of the country, its people, and its culture. You could say the same thing about the Nazis and Raiders, and even the Soviets in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Difference is that those guys suck, so who cares if they're represented as cartoonishly evil? Here, India is, a real country with real people, and it feels kinda gross. I don't think Lucas or Spielberg had any racist intentions. At the end of the day, these movies serve as an outlet to indulge in their boyish taste of exotic locations, but it still doesn't make it right, mind you. This deserves to be called out, but it deserves a different categorization than, say, Birth of a Nation, or even Gone with the Wind. As for the violence, this is something I didn't get as a kid, and to this day I still don't. Unless my brain blocked out the memory of certain scenes, I remember this movie being about as violent as all the rest. Sure, this movie has hearts getting ripped out and a dude torn apart by crocodiles, but the first one had a dude being sliced apart by a plane rotor and guys literally melting to death and being blown to pieces. Crusade toned it down a bit, but it still ends with the main villain being melted into a goddamn skeleton right in front of our eyes. So it's no slouch either. All in all, yes, it's violent, the most out of all of them, but not by much, and it certainly doesn't out-poltergeist, as Spielberg once said. If there's anything that I hated as a kid and I still hate now, it's Willie Scott. She gains her goodwill by being a knockout in the opening segment, in looks and in performance, and then the movie spends the rest of its runtime obliterating that will into tiny, annoying pieces. But we're not saying anything new, and I need to emphasize that I in no way blame Kate Capshaw for her performance. She was told to say these lines a certain way, and she ultimately delivered, despite the thin characterization and the arduous conditions. It's quite frankly a miracle that she'd end up loving and marrying the man who put her through so much hardship. But still, this character ain't exactly to write home about. And believe it or not, my problem isn't that she can't take care of herself. This is a whole other conversation for another day, but our culture began looking at damsel in distress type characters and saying that because they were in distress and had to be rescued, they were bad characters. What these people forget is that many of these damsels, while lacking in physical strength, were still good characters in their own right, with engaging personalities and motivations. Even though they couldn't affect the plot through their actions, they remained engaging characters to watch. And that's where Willie fails. Take away the scenes of Marion getting kidnapped and you have a gutsy and likable rogue. Take away the scenes of Elsa Schneider getting kidnapped and we have a devilishly seductive femme fatale. Take away Willie getting kidnapped and we get... yeah. But while I agree with all the criticisms, my biggest problem is ultimately with the pacing. For a series known for its rip-roaring stakes, this movie kinda drags in the middle, with a lot of downtime setting stuff up and indulging in torture and occultism. It's kind of exhausting and you'll be begging for it to get to the point. Or at least I did. There's something there to Indy being turned dark for a second, but with these movies being what they are, there's not much tension to wondering if he'll snap out of it or not. Wait, didn't I say I like this movie? Because I actually do, believe it or not. Even with its terrible depiction of India, intense atmosphere, and plotting pace, you ultimately get another Indiana Jones movie, as creative and exciting as the ones that would come before and after. The set pieces may be fewer, but they're just as iconic. Who can forget the fight in Shanghai, or the minecart chase, or the bridge battle? It pushes itself to the brink of absurdity, but it does just enough to keep you on your toes. Not to mention, Harrison Ford looks better as Indy here than in any other movie. He's really settled into the role, physically but also in his mannerisms. Also need to give a special shout out to Kei Kwan as Short Round. Some people love this character, some hate him, but I land firmly in the love camp. It's nice to see a child sidekick whose defining trait isn't just cute, but also genuinely interesting. The accent is a bit much, but I'll always love this little twerp. Is there anything else to say? To be honest, not really. People always point to this as the black sheep of the original trilogy, but I never felt that way, then and now. To me it was, and always will be, another Indiana Jones flick, but with a different coat of paint. If you adore the other movies, you'll like this one and might forgive some of its faults. If you only ever tolerated the others, then this one won't endear you and you may actually hate it. But ultimately, Temple of Doom remains true to the spirit of Indiana Jones and to the 80s Spielberg name, and for me, that's more than enough.